Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness is mostly introduced in university syllabus. Heart of Darkness is a novel that includes Conrad's idea of multiple narrators. Heart of Darkness is a novel that is an example of impressionist novel. Heart of Darkness is a critique of colonialism. Heart of Darkness is suggestive that shows darkness or heart of darkness as a journey from Belgian Congo to journey from Belgium to the Congo ruled by Belgian a journey from enlightened modern Europe or European world to the core of darkness, primitivity of Africa, from the morally sound civilized world to brutally cruel, immoral world. And that has suggestion. River Congo that looks like a serpent and alludes to biblical idea of deceptive evil. The story is told by intermediate narrator. Marlowe means there is a first narrator. Narrator can be author or novelist, and then Marlowe, the second major character, is also used to narrate the story with his own point of view. Marlowe is a character who has been appointed by the colonizer to bring back another employee of the company, that's Kurds. Kurds who once came as a representative of colonial power, but during his stay at Congo, he is fascinated by its world, though he meets the material end of colonialism, mean collecting ivory and giving that ivory to the colonizer. But the other side of colonialism, that's a civilizing mission to civilize the natives, he betrays that mission because he enjoys the rites and rituals of the Africans, and he loves to be there as a demigod, as a person who is worshipped by the native Africans. So he plays with the weakness of Africans, and he enjoys that, you can say, romance of primitive world, the world of darkness, the world of crime, the world of sin, the world of brutality and cruelty, where it doesn't bother to change the beast of burden into normal human being. And Marlowe has a job, because Marlowe and Kurtz both are Englishmen. So Marlowe is assigned a job to go there and bring back Kurds. During his travel, Marlowe recollects how England was conquered by the Roman Empire, and in this way he draws a comparison between ancient conquest and modern days colonialism. The nearer he goes, Marlowe is also overwhelmed by some unseen power. Though he is not captured as Kurds is captured, Marlowe draws many comparisons, including comparison of Kurds and manager. Kurds and manager are two sides of colonialism. Manager who does not like to be part of the natives, he always remains at a distance. He follows the colonial purpose, mean administrative purpose as well as materialist objective of collecting ivory. Kurds only fulfills materialist perspective purpose, but he has personal motive to stay there as a demigod of the natives. We can say Kurds loves the natives, though he causes their death as well, because it's part of the rituals, it's part of their cultures. ये इसको आप इसी तरह समझ सकते हैं कि जैसे कोई अंग्रेज जो है हिंदुस्तान में सती की रस्म की तरफदारी करे और सपोर्ट करके ये कहे कि जी ये तो यहाँ के मुकामी लोगों का हुस्न है और हिंदुस्तानी औरतें तो वफा की पुतलियां हैं, शोहर मरता है तो उसकी चिता के साथ ही जल के राख हो जाती हैं, और वो उसको आइडियलाइज करे। इसके मुकाबले में हम ब्रिटिश के वो रूल्स देखते हैं जो इंडिया में आके सती की रस्म को बैन कर, उस पर पाबंदी आयद करते हैं, उसे गैर इंसानी करार देते। So Marlowe meets Kurds and is influenced by charisma of his personality. That's between the line charisma of colonialism and critic of colonialism have ambivalent feelings for colonialism. अक्सर हिस्ट्री में इसको बताया जाता है कि जो colonialism की तनकीद करने वाले हैं वही उससे मोहब्बत और नफरत के मिले जुले जज्बात यानी ambivalent feelings रखते हैं। Marlowe tries to bring Kurds back, but he fails after different trials and difficulties. When he tries to bring Kurds back, Kurds dies on the way, and his last words were horror, horror. When Marlowe returns home, and he has some letters which were written by Kurds for his fiancée, he meets her and he tells the lie that when Kurds died, he uttered her name. That lie, that false reporting of Kurds' last word is the major debate of this novel, and that shows the heart of darkness. Mean, is it the environment that corrupts Marlowe? Is it charisma of Kurt's personality that corrupts Marlowe? Or is it just a consolation for the girl who has waited for her future husband for long, and Marlowe consoles her in this way without realizing its implication in her future life? The Heart of Darkness contrasts between Western civilization and what that civilization has done to Africa. Early in the novel, while on the River Thames near London, Marlowe speaks, and this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. I was thinking of very old times when the Romans first came here 1900 years ago. The other day, light came out of this river since you say nights. Yes, but it is like a running blaze on a plain, like a flash of lightning in the clouds. We live in the flicker, may it last as long as the old earth keeps rolling, but darkness was here yesterday. The theme of darkness leads to the figure of Kurtz, the central character, a portrait of how the commercial and material exploitation of colonial lands can make men morally hollow and can create a permanent nightmare in the soul. The fears Conrad expresses find an echo in Eliot's poetry later on, as The Hollow Man is a poem by T.S. Eliot, and there is an epigraph of this poem which write, Mr. Cards he died. That's a quotation from the novel Heart of Darkness, but it sums up you can say spiritual decline of colonizer. The horror, these are the last words of Kurtz. Joseph Conrad also shares with other writers of this time a sense of impending anarchy and the collapse of moral and political order. So what was anticipated that was seen in World War as a reality, or after Great War in the times of emerging fascism and later on Holocaust. Conrad's novels are political novels like Nostromo, The Secret Agent, and Under Western Eyes. Throughout his fiction, Conrad depicts human isolation, conflict between different parts of one's personality and external fate, difficulties of human communication. He is often thought a pessimist novelist like Thomas Hardy because the enigma which he presents that's not easy to address or respond. What Marlowe has done, what are its motives? What is the plight of the native African, which have been presented as just, you can say, a little better or hardly better than the beast? Though whatever was presented by Joseph Conrad, that was criticized by African writers later on, particularly Chinua Achebe, who calls Joseph Conrad a racist novelist, and he claims that he has a sense of superiority, and that sense of superiority is the result of his faith in colonialism. Heart of Darkness is a critique of colonialism for its brutality and cruelty, but it does not disown colonialism as an evil practice. Idea is that colonialism should fulfill its promise of civilizing the uncivilized people. And HB and other post-colonial writers, they believe that Europe has no right to civilize Africa or any other colonized world. Joseph Conrad, for his technique of multiple narrators, for his impressionist ideas, for his bold critique of colonialism and link of corruption or spiritual corruption of characters and the practice of colonialism. Next novelist is Ford Madox Ford. He was part of the de-imagist movement that was a modernist movement, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, etc. And Ford Madox Ford was an influential writer of his time. He wrote a novel that is called The Good Soldier, and that is his best anti-war novel. The Good Soldier is described as the greatest tragedy of sexuality in English prose. His impressionist trilogy is Fifth Queen and tetralogy. Tetralogy means which includes 4 novels. Parade's End. Parade's End is a tetralogy that contains 4 novels about war and its enigma. After Conrad, the novelist, which is often introduced in universities, though in European universities with a strict warning, but in India, he is loved most in Pakistan. Pakistan is also part of, you can say, Indian tradition. So in East, D.H. Lawrence is much liked. As son of a coal miner, father, and a school, biblical school teacher, mother, Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence was born in the mining village of Eastwood in Nottinghamshire. Lawrence's mother fought to lift her children out of the working class. She was determined her son would not become a coal miner, and she encouraged him to take up teaching. That earlier life of D.H. Lawrence has been shown in his semi autobiographical novel, Sons and Lovers. And that novel shows the domestic conflicts in his own home between an inarticulate father and self-consciously genteel mother. It also shows the impact of those women who left earlier impact on the personality of Lawrence, as well as his relationship with his mother, that is thought in many ways Oedipal complex of the writer. Later in his life, he realized that his mother had prejudiced him against his father and against the working class. He grew to believe that people like his father had a vital, whole personality that was lacking in middle class culture. With its material and social ambitions, so he revised his worldview and he stood in favor of inner voice, intuition, nature, instinct, and he stood against intellect, reasoning, rationality. His novels include The Rainbow and its sequel, Women in Love, and highly controversial Lady Chatterley's Lover. In Rainbow and Women in Love, Lawrence explores human relationship with psychological precision and with intense poetic feeling. He combines the detailed realism with poetic symbolism. He was more innovative and experimental novelist. D.H. Lawrence novels are influenced by George Eliot psychological realism. And he depicts the formation and development of an individual character, as in his novel Women in Love, we see the characters like Birkin, who in many ways appears as mouthpiece of D.H. Lawrence. In his novels, gender is very problematic. Not only man-woman relationship is so complex, as we see in Women in Love, the relationship of Ursula and Birkin, Birkin and Rhodes, Birkin and Gerald, Gerald Critch and Gudrun, Gudrun and Lorke. It was not simply in relationship between men and women that D.H. Lawrence sought to connect. There are creative tensions both in his novels and extensively in his short stories between different generations, between man and his environment, and between human reason and human instinct. There is a famous quote, blood is wiser than intellect, and blood stands for instinct in this quotation. Lawrence wanted the tensions to be creative and not satirical. That is his idea that tension are not futile, they are fruitful. The area in Nottinghamshire in which he was brought up highlighted the contrast between industrial and natural world. The industrial world is associated with mechanized feelings and with the death of spontaneous instinctive responses to life, and Lawrence remains in search of spontaneous life and spontaneous expression of life. He was a painter, an essayist, a dramatist, a critic, a poet. All of you must be aware of his poem Snake that captures the four different moods of the speaker. He believes that complete honesty between lovers will lead to greater self-knowledge, deeper fulfillment, and a stronger will to live. This is found between men in the highly charged chapters of Women in Love and the White Peacock between women in the Rainbow and between men and women in Lady Chatterley's Lover. Lady Chatterley's Lover is not only a novel about sexual fantasies, but it's about class conflict. Because her lover is the gatekeeper. Lawrence traveled constantly, and his travel writing underlines both his descent from English life and his joy in the freshness of new experience in places as far apart as Australia, Mexico, and Cornwall. His is always a search for the primitive, for the gods of a place, as in Etruscan places or in the plumed serpent set in Mexico. He wrote Kangaroo, that is about Australia. Tension in sexual feeling is a recurring theme in D.H. Lawrence's novel. He saw sexuality as a driving force in human relationship, which could be both creative and destructive. Sexual love could be destructive if it were too mechanical or based on rationality or reason, instead of spontaneous and natural. He described relationship with uncompromising originality and genuinely sought ways of reconciling tensions and contrast. He once wrote that the human personality was like an iceberg with the major part of it under the surface. With that quotation, we can understand his concern. D.H. Lawrence is introduced as the novelist of vision, meaning he has a mystic vision of the world, and he shares that idea of vision with French realist novelist Henri Balzac. and Russian novelist Tolstoy. Though his vision lacks clarity and it is thought that his work sometimes compromises his art for the sake of his vision, and he is counted as third after Balzac and Tolstoy. D.H. Lawrence wrote about the pressures of working class life from close quarters, but then moved on. One major novel of the early years of the 20th century is a document of working class life, written by one who never actually lived in situation described in his novel. He also wrote an essay that is called The Modern Fiction, in which he shared his idea of modern novel. D.H. Lawrence is a novelist who was concerned to represent the innermost thought and feeling of his characters. In his development as a novelist, plot line of his novels became less important than the shifts in feeling and stream of consciousness of his characters. Lawrence externalizes their relationship with the outside world, particularly the world of nature. But other writers focus more on the inner working of their characters. Those writers who focus on the inner working of their character's mind, they are writer of stream of consciousness. The term stream of consciousness was coined by William James. He was American philosopher, the brother of Henry James, who wrote the famous book Psychology, and who was a leading pragmatist philosopher of 20th century. And stream of consciousness technique was employed by many novelists, including the great influence of 20th century fiction, French novelist Michael Proust. Michael Proust was, we can say, the guiding star of stream of consciousness novels. He impressed all stream of consciousness writers, including Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, the two significant novelists. Virginia Woolf, we see that raises a voice against the novels of Arnold Bennett. That's the continuity of Victorian tradition, a realist tradition of novel. She wanted a novel that could capture characters' mind and characters' feeling. Virginia Woolf experiments very successfully with the concept of time on the clock and time in the mind. Virginia Woolf was born into a large, talented, upper class, intellectual family in London. Her father, Leslie Stephen, was a famous Victorian biographer, critic, philosopher. Her mother died when she was 13. Mother was typical Victorian lady, represented through character of Mrs. Ramsay in To the Lighthouse. Virginia Woolf, she suffered many nervous breakdowns and she was victim of insanity. Her father exerted a powerful inhibiting influence over her, and she later confessed that she could never have written her stories and novels while he was alive. After his father's death, after her father's death, Virginia Woolf was at the center of the Bloomsbury group. Once her father was member of that group. That's the group of an artistic and literary group where Lytton Strachey, the famous biographer, was also a member. Mental illness affected Virginia Woolf throughout her life. In 1941, at a time of deep personal depression with the Second World War and deeply dissatisfied with her own writing, she committed suicide. We know that she actually put stones in her pockets and she waded into the water where she was drowned. Virginia Woolf's first novels were relatively traditional in form rather than, you can say, pure stream of consciousness. She later rebelled against the materialism of H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett, and John Galsworthy. Her characteristic method appears in her third novel, Jacob's Room. She renders the flow of experience through stream of consciousness technique. But her work is also characterized by an intensely poetic style. As we say, D.H. Lawrence has poetic symbolism. Virginia Woolf is also poetic prose writer. She utilizes poetic rhythms and imagery to create a lyrical impressionism in order to capture her character's mood. Lyrical impressionism is a technique with which she shares Joseph Conrad's ideas. As diversely in individual